Okay, YouTubers, I messed up last night's capture of my Periscope about Matthew Shepard, so I'm going to try to record it for you guys this way. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Hi, everybody. Hey, how's everyone doing today? I figured I'd give everyone a second to catch up. And then we'll start chatting. Hey, everyone. Hi. How's everyone doing this evening? Hello. Okay. Hey, everyone. Let me get my camera set up here. Hi. Good afternoon, / evening, / I don't know where the hell you're at, so I don't know what time of day it is. How's everyone doing today? I hope everyone is doing well. It's Tuesday. I'm a little tired. It's been a little bit of a stressful day for me. I've been having lots of important phone calls and emails and stressful crap happening, so I've been dealing with that most of the day. It's kind of had me a little exhausted. But I did want to talk to you guys, and of course, you know, this is kind of my nightly thing now. I sit down here in front of all of you and I share some stories and tell you about what's going on and all of that. I can remember the Matthew Shepard story and feeling I could never come out, and now I am out, and I don't know what. Maybe ran out of words. Anywho, so today I thought I would do something a little bit different. I know we've been doing a lot of fun, happy stuff, you know, gossip and talking about what's been happening. But I thought today I would show you some of the stuff I could never show you on the radio show. You know, when you're doing a radio show, they have this thing called theater of the mind, where you tell a story and you try to create an image inside the mind of the listeners. It teaches you to become a great storyteller, but sometimes being able to see things visually is pretty fucking cool. So one of the great things about Periscope is now I have the capacity to show you some of the things that maybe I couldn't show you before. Specifically, I thought today we would go over some of the Matthew Shepard stuff. Isn't it too hot for a hoodie? It's kind of cold in my house, actually. The AC's been running all day. I was supposed to turn it off and I forgot. So I'm a little chilly. Anyway, so I thought that I would share some of the stuff that I've saved over the years. You know, we didn't talk about my relationship with Matthew Shepard very often on the show because our show was kind of fun, happy hour, woohoo, kind of stuff like that. But, you know, there's a lot there in my history with Matthew, and it's a very rich history filled with some sadness, some happiness, a lot of things. And, you know, just because we didn't show it or talk about it on the air very often doesn't mean it wasn't really very important to me. In fact, just the opposite is very important. And it means a lot to me to be able to share it with some of you. So, this is going to make you cry. I hope not. Actually, it's funny. When I look back on Matthew, I don't think of it as a sad time. I mean, I think of it as a trying time, as a hard time, but, you know, not sadness. And I'll tell you why. Primarily because, you know, Matthew and I were very good friends, and, you know, lots of people like to say we were best friends. I don't know if I'd go that far, but we were very close friends. And when he died, you know, the first reaction, of course, is one of horror and sadness and all of the feelings that many people had. And those of us who knew him well, you know, it was just multiplied. But then, you know, some really incredible things came about. And, you know, you can choose to remember the horrible, horrible stuff that happened. You can choose to remember the things that make you sad or angry or all of those things. Or you can choose to remember the things that came about that were really positive. And I guess for me, that's what I do. I try to remember the positive things that have come about because of Matthew. Things that if he had not died, never would have happened. So, there are a couple of interesting stories that I have about Matthew. One of them is the last conversation I had with him. I was working in a coffee shop, and so every morning I got up at like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And if you called me in the middle of the night, you better fucking be dying, literally, because I just did not have time for that shit. Because, I didn't get a lot of sleep. And Matthew had called me in the middle of the night. And I was so mad at him. I can't even begin to tell you how angry I was that he was calling me in the middle of the night. But I hadn't talked to him in a few weeks. He had just moved to Laramie. And so I took his call anyway, even though I really was not in the mood to talk to him. I'm really glad I did, because we had this weird conversation. It was one of those conversations where, you just start talking, and then all of a sudden your philosophy on life starts coming out, and you start talking about really deep shit, and maybe it's because it was the middle of the night, we were tired. I honestly don't know why we had the conversation we did, but we had a really deep conversation that night, and we talked a lot about what Matthew's goals in life were, what he wanted to do in life, where he saw himself as an adult. And, he'd just gone back to school. He felt like he needed to go and get a degree, and he really had some goals that he had set for himself that he wanted to accomplish, which was nice, because prior to that, when he was living in Denver, he didn't seem to have any of those things. So it was really a refreshing thing to see inside of him, this happiness and this joy and this desire to kind of take on the world. And one of the things we talked about at great length was this fight that he had just had with his parents. So they just got into some big fight, and they were arguing over what he should be when he grows up, essentially, and money. Those are the two things they always fought about. Mostly money, though, because he was frivolous with money, and they were always trying to, try to get some fiscal responsibility in him. It just would never happen. So anywho, he started talking about how his parents had these big, big dreams of how, he should be a diplomat or something like that. And keep in mind that the Shepards at the time were world travelers. His father was working in Saudi Arabia. In many ways, they were a pretty advanced family. And he's like, I don't know if that's for me. And he kept talking about how he really just wanted to help make the world a better place. When he lived in Denver, he used to meet this homeless guy at McDonald's, and he'd buy him dinner, and he'd sit down and chat with him. Or there was this other guy at Diedrich's that nobody ever wanted to sit with, but Matt would go out, and he would smoke a cigarette or two with him and have a big conversation. And, he always was trying to help people. He was always trying to make people feel welcome or included in life. And that was just who he was. So we talked a lot about that. He's like, I just want to make the world a better place. I don't care how I do it. I just want to do it. My mom and dad want me to do this big stuff. I don't want to do that. But, he wanted to do what he wanted to do. So when I think about Matt, what I think about is how much he accomplished with his life. I don't think he ever could have imagined that the difference he wanted to make would be this significant. And I think that that's part of what makes Matt so special to those of us who knew him, because we always knew he had the potential to make a difference. None of us expected it to be in this way, obviously, but it's not surprising to us, those of us who knew him, and that's pretty cool. Are you sure this story is not a story that will make us cry? I promise it's not. I'm trying to be upbeat about it. Shit. So my last conversation with Matt was actually one of the most important conversations I'd ever had with him. Part of the reason I feel that way is because it really set me up to answer all of the questions that would come down the pike following his death. Once I was exposed to the media as a friend of his, I'll explain that a little bit. All of a sudden, all these people start calling 60 to 100 phone calls a day from media outlets all around the world wanting interviews, and a lot of them ask the same types of questions. What I quickly realized is there was a way to take what I knew about Matthew and what was happening in the world, and I was able to kind of craft those two things together to tell a very specific narrative that I thought would help educate people about hate crimes, LGBT issues, about how Matthew wanted to change the world, all of those things. So, it didn't take long to learn how to do that. Maybe a couple weeks is all. And all of us who kind of got thrust into that craziness, we all learned to work together to kind of tell this narrative. Damn, people stop asking dumb questions, let her tell the story. Oh, it's fine. I just ignore them until I'm ready to talk about them. We crafted this narrative, and we really, it didn't take long, but originally the story that was being told was one of, this saintly kid was tied up on a fence like Jesus Christ and was murdered and left to die, and it wasn't a real depiction of who Matthew was. He was a real person after all. He had real problems, much like any 20-year-old kid would have. So we kind of learned how to fashion how we spoke to the media, and a lot of that information came from that conversation I had with Matthew. So I always think, oh man, if the phone rings in the middle of the night, always answer the phone. That's the moral of that story. Always answer the phone, because you never know, it might be the most important conversation you have in your life. And for me, it was definitely one of the most. So I opened up my Periscope, showing you a copy of The Advocate from 1 year after Matthew's death. I literally have boxes and boxes of magazines and newspaper clippings from all around the world talking about Matthew. And I've kept this for a few reasons. One, because I want to preserve the story as it was originally told, because it's changed a lot over the years. In recent years, we've heard things like, Matthew wasn't killed because it was a hate crime. It was a drug deal gone wrong. Or, he knew his killers before they killed him. And, there's kind of this whole revisionist history that is trying to be told. And what's great about having all this original material is you can't dispute it. It's there. It's always and forever a part of our history. And so you can go back and look at it and say, well, okay, let's look and see what the police officers who were investigating the crime actually had to say back then when it was happening. And it's nice to be able to have that information. So I've saved it for a lot of reasons. That's one. Part of it is because when I go to high schools and colleges, which I've done for years now, and I do speaking engagements, it's nice to be able to use these reference materials to share the story as well. So some of the stuff I'm going to show you, some of it I've never shown anyone ever. It's just kind of stuff for me. Some of it is stuff that I've put together for various presentations that I've done over the years. So I'm going to start with, what am I going to start with? Okay, I'm going to start with the stuff that I made for Clark, I think it's Clark University. It's in Worcester, Mass. My friend Erin, I love her, she invited me to come speak at her school. And because it was for a friend of mine, I decided to do it extra special. And so I took some of the materials that I had saved way back then. This was, 15, 14 years ago. It was a long-ass time ago. No, I can tell you when it was. It was in 2001 because she tracked me down when I was living in Arizona. She kind of stalked me and tracked me down and said, I need to know you. You need to know me. And that's how we became friends, and then I went and spoke at her school. So it was around 2001, 2002 when I put together this stuff. All right, so let me pick up my camera here. All right, I'm going to flip it around. Okay. So the first one that I made was about the memorial vigils that happened. This is the first bulletin board I made. Obviously, so this sign right here, the Matthew Shepard peace sign, this was used at the memorial that happened in Denver, Colorado. That memorial happened the day Matthew died. I was scheduled to speak at that memorial the day before they came and asked me, and I wrote my speech that day, and then I had to revise it on the way to the Capitol building in Denver on the day of the vigil because Matthew had died. And it was at that particular event where I became known as a friend of Matthew for the first time. Up until then, the 5 days he was in the hospital, I hadn't really spoken out publicly, so I had a little bit of peace until that moment. And then everything stopped. Then it got crazy. So down here It's a glow stick that was from the National Museum, or from the National Vigil in Washington, D.C. That's the one you may remember that Ellen DeGeneres spoke at. I can't remember how I got that. I think someone sent it to me. I don't remember. Or brought it back for me. I can't remember. All I know is that that's what that is. Okay, so over here, this is a pretty cool thing. This is... it's a yellow band with green circles, and it was worn by the students of the University of Wyoming during their homecoming week, which was right after Matthew died, to remember Matthew and to make a stand against hate. And my friend Jim Osborne had a very strong hand in making that, and they were pretty cool. Then there were buttons like this. Some of you may recognize. Those were made at different vigils across the country and were sent to me over the years and collected over the years. Just as ways of remembering Matthew and remembering what had happened to him. All right, so let's move on. All right, hold on. Let me fix this real quick. Okay, so... as many of you know, a lot of different projects came out because of Matthew, from plays to movies to music. And these are some examples of some of the stuff I've saved about those. There were concerts for Matthew. Elton John played at the University of Wyoming. Pierre, Paul, and Mary played at University of Wyoming one year. This is the original playbill from the Laramie Project, which, by the way, I was the last person portrayed in the play to go and see it. And Moises Kaufman and the Tectonic Theater Group literally had to force me to come to New York City to see it, because I was just afraid that I wasn't going to like it. I was afraid that it would make me cry. I was afraid it was going to bring up a lot of emotions I wasn't ready to deal with. But when I did go and see it, I was amazed at how well they captured Laramie, the people of the town, and how well they captured the story of what happened there. Without really having to talk much about, without having to portray Matt. That was the most interesting thing. They didn't have to portray Matthew. This is I believe one of the invitations here. Let me just flip this around, from the Laramie Project movie. There's Christina Ricci, if I remember correctly, playing me. I went to see the screening of that in Los Angeles. I was living in Phoenix, Arizona at the time, and I got an invitation to come to Los Angeles to see the film once it premiered. Another movie that came out, and I have mixed feelings about this movie, is a movie called Journey to a Hate-Free Millennium. This movie was an independent documentary that covered Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Jr., and the Columbine shootings. It's an amazing film. Where I am conflicted about it is because the filmmaker who made this film ended up being kind of an asshole, and he did a lot of really shitty things and to promote himself, and he kind of lost sight, I think, of what the intention of the film was for. There is amazing, probably the best angel action footage is in Journey to a Hate-Free Millennium. There's some really, really incredible stuff. I actually went to a screening of Journey to a Hate-Free Millennium, and sitting right next to me were Anne Heche and Ellen DeGeneres, and we cried throughout the whole film, and we borrowed each other's tissues, and it was really sweet. And one of the many times I met Ellen, but definitely one I will not forget. And I really loved Anne Heche. She was a super sweetheart, in particular at that screening that we went to. All right, up next, let's see what else I've got here. Okay, so this is about Angel Action. This is, for those of you who don't know, Angel Action was a silent protest that I put together in response to Fred Phelps. So Fred Phelps had decided to come to Laramie for the trials of Russell Henderson and Aaron McKinney, the two attackers who killed Matthew. And I hated how Fred Phelps got all this attention and how the media always covered him, and it just made me crazy. And so with the help of a few friends, we were able to come up with this idea called Angel Action, where we dressed as angels in these big, giant angel wings, as you can see in some of the pictures here. And then we stood in front of signs like this to cover up Fred Phelps and all of his followers. And when we first did it, I will say this, it was one of the scariest days of my entire life, because when we showed up at the courthouse, nobody knew we were coming. We showed up, and we were dressed like angels, and we looked like crazy people. And everyone, it was like a parting of the waves. It was when we showed up, and everyone just let us get where we needed to be. And we set up, and we didn't say anything. Eventually, I went and read a press release, which is actually right here. I'll read that to you in a second. And look how happy I look. Isn't that a great picture of me with a love and lust sign behind my head? It kind of cracks me up. Anywho, when we got there, we surrounded him, and it was the first time anyone had ever successfully shut Fred Phelps down. And if there's one thing I take a great amount of pride in my life for, it is that I showed people, with the help of my friends, that you can stand up against hate like Fred Phelps, and you can make a difference, even if there are 5 of you, or 6 of you, or 12 of you. And you don't have to sit there idly by and let that shit happen in your community. You can take a stand, and that's what we did. So let me read to you what our press release says. Here, let me give you, I'll let you look at this picture while I read it. Okay, it says, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Romaine Patterson. I'm from Denver, Colorado, and I am the bearer of a message. Before you stands a band of angels. They come from a number of backgrounds. They don't represent any one group. They don't represent any one religion, sex, race, age, or sexual orientation. They are merely a group of people who join with me because they believe in honesty and truth. So often we find that people are willing to make a lot of noise about what they believe to be true. We don't believe we have to say anything at all. Aside from this brief explanatory statement, our actions will speak for themselves. Just one look, and the truth is plainly clear. Our focus is to bring forth a message of peace and love. Hatred is running rampant through our everyday lives, but as a group, we choose to lift ourselves above that hatred. We feel, as so many others do, that love and compassion for our community and our humanity are the answers that so many people are desperately searching for. And so we bring forth a message from God, if you will. Love, respect, and compassion for everyone is why we are here today. I could no longer sit idly by and watch others bring forth messages that were nothing more than vindictive and hate-filled. As a young person, I feel it's necessary to show the great nation that we live in that there doesn't need to be this kind of violence and hatred in our world, and that loving one another doesn't mean that we have to compromise our beliefs. It simply means that we choose to be compassionate and respectful of others. With that said, I would like to now rejoin my angels silently, bringing forth our gift to you. If you have questions, I will be available later today. Thank you for your time, and God bless. So that was our message. Pretty simple, and yet it still applies today. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay. So 1 year later, this is some of the coverage from 1 year later from the Branding Iron, which is a Laramie newspaper. You can see there. One of the cool things that happened 1 year later is that there were so many cool things were happening. One of the things is that they carried over 100 teddy bears created in the memory of hate crimes victims, and they carried them for over 120 miles from Fort Collins, where Matt was hospitalized, to Laramie, Wyoming, and these teddy bears were later auctioned off for charity. See, those are the teddy bears. All right, let's see what else I have. Some of these I haven't even looked at so long, I don't even know what's on here. So bear with me here, people. Okay, April 6th, 1999. This was the day of the, which one is this one? Hold on, I gotta look. Oh, this is the Russell Henderson one. So this is the day that Russell Henderson pled guilty at a hearing. which, by the way, was completely surprising to many of us because we did not expect for him to plead guilty that day. We expected that the trial would get started and that would be that, but it was crazy because that's not what happened. He ended up pleading guilty, and he got 2 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. This is the first day also when Fred Phelps protested outside the courthouse, and the Angel Action was there. It was a very cold April day. It was the day after Easter. I remember it very well. And for those of you who don't know the difference between Russell Henderson and Aaron McKinney, Russell Henderson was the young man who drove the car, or the truck, actually, and he was also responsible for tying Matthew to the fence so that Aaron McKinney could beat him more savagely. So that's what happened to Russell. Okay. Oh, this one actually, we're going to go back in time. These are out of order, sorry. So October 16th, 1998, this was the day of Matthew's memorial service in Casper, Wyoming. As you can see from some of the pictures, it was a really snowy, horrible day in Casper, Wyoming. I drove with my brother John and a friend of ours from Denver, and the snow was so bad we honestly didn't even know that we would make the 4-hour drive from Denver to Casper because the roads were so bad. One of the interesting things I noticed along the drive was that all of the flags, the state flags in the state of Wyoming, were at half-mast that day in honor of Matthew, which is pretty damn cool. This was also the first time we met Fred Phelps. Up until then, I didn't even know who he was. He never existed to me until that day, but that's where we met him for the first time. This is one of the things that they handed out while we were at the memorial service. It talks a little bit about Matthew. It has a poem inside it as well. But that was handed out when we got there. I remember that day when I got to the church. It was a crazy day because it was super snowy. The protesters were outside. The church was so packed that not only did they fill one church, I think they filled 2 or 3 churches, plus a couple of local parks with people who wanted to be at the memorial service. And then they broadcast the audio to those locations. But we showed up at the actual church where the memorial service was happening. And I remember we were standing on the sidewalk, and all of a sudden, this guy comes up to me and taps me on the shoulder, and he looks just like fucking Secret Service, I shit you not. And he's like, Romaine? And I'm like, yes. And he goes, can you please follow me? And I was like, okay. And so I left my brother outside, and I was escorted in through like a side door of the church and taken upstairs, where I was promptly put in front of Judy and Dennis. And I remember, here, let me flip this. I remember when I saw Judy and Dennis, Judy goes, oh, Romaine, you're here. And I said, of course I am. Where else would I be? And we talked for a few minutes, and, they had been essentially ushering people by them one after another. And you could just tell that they were emotionally exhausted from all the craziness that was happening. So, the memorial service was really nice, aside from the protesters. I got to see a lot of our friends that we had from when we were in college together. It was actually quite a beautiful day, in believe it or not. Even though it was all crazy and insane, it was a nice day. Okay. Back around. Okay, so this one is my friend Matthew Shepard. This is just a little introduction to where he was at. He'd moved to Laramie to go back to school. He was trying to find a safe place to live. There's Laramie, Wyoming population sign. Not very fucking many. And then, of course, the story. This is the fireside bar where he met Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson. That night they drove him to the fence. There's a picture of the fence. Which, by the way, people don't know this about the fence, but the fence is actually not what you think. Most people see this fence and think that it actually fences in something. It doesn't. The fence was only about, maybe 20 feet long. And it actually was a property marker. It was not a fence that fenced in anything at all. And the fence is no longer there. The owners of the fence tore it down because so many people were making a pilgrimage. There, that says it. Out there that they got tired of people on their land, so they tore it down. Not that it has stopped people from going out there. This is a picture. This is probably one of the most famous pictures of me from that time, and I hate this picture more than life itself. Not because it's a bad picture. It's a great picture. It was taken by a photographer by the name of Nanette Martin. What I hate about this picture is the brutal honesty of it. This was 1 year after Matthew's death, and I was taken out to the fence. I had avoided going out to there until that date, and I was taken out to visit the fence for the first time. So this was the first time I'd ever been at the fence, and the second I touched it, I was so overwhelmed with emotion, I literally fell to my knees and just cried. And so, yeah, so that's where that picture is, and that's why I hate it so much, because it's just so real. Okay, moving right along. Okay, this is the day that Matthew died, October 12th, 1998, and these are some of the newspapers from that day. The first one is from the Rocky Mountain News, and the second one is from the Denver Post. You can see down here that the Laramie was gathering to grieve. The beaten man is still unconscious. Now, you asked, well, if he died, why are these the stories? Well, it's because Matthew died at about 1 in the morning. So all of the papers for that day had already gone to print. So when I got to work in the morning, some papers had this, other papers had other news. It was pretty hard. So that's that. Okay, and every morning when I got to the coffee shop, I always checked the newspapers because I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that was where I would get current and updated information. Okay, so October 13th, 1998. This is the day that I spoke at the vigil in Denver. And you can see thousands of people attended vigils. There's the story finally that he had died. And then you see here some of the stuff that had been sent to the hospital to Matthew's parents while he was there. They got so much stuff. The hospital didn't know what to do with it all, so they started donating it to wherever they could because there were so many flowers and cards and everything was just being sent there. It was insane. A lot of people ask me if I went to see Matthew when he was in the hospital, and I didn't. And the reason for that is because Judy and Dennis didn't get there until about a day or so before he died, and I didn't think I'd be able to get in to see him. Because the only family that was there was an aunt and an uncle who did not know me particularly well. So I was worried that I wouldn't be able to see them or to get in to see him. So I stayed in Denver and just kind of like the rest of the world paid attention to the news. And I called. They had a 1-800 number you could call at the hospital to get updates on Matthew's condition. And I used to call that shit every hour on the hour almost, sometimes more, just to see how he was doing. Okay, so that's that. Let's see what's next. Okay, so this is October 14th, 1998. I wrote here, the world starts focusing on the town of Laramie, often depicted in a negative light. In the meantime, Matthew's attackers have made confessions to the police about the attack. So, you can see that that's clearly what's happening. Here's the story where the bicyclist recalls the discovery. Matthew was discovered by a bicyclist who was out mountain biking in the area where he was found. It's quite amazing. That anyone ever found him out there, frankly. Here's a depiction. Wyoming. That's often how I spell Wyoming. Okay, let's see what else I've got. Okay, this is more from October 13th, 1998. This is from, oh gosh, there's so many different news outlets here, but you can see kind of some of the national coverage that was happening. Oh, this is an interesting one. In Fort Collins, where Matthew was in the hospital, during their homecoming parade, there was a frat house that had made a scarecrow parade float and put the word gay across the scarecrow's face. And this was a reference to the fact that the bicyclist who found Matthew said that he at first thought that Matthew was a scarecrow because he couldn't believe that anyone would tie a real person up to a fence. He just thought it was a scarecrow. And it wasn't until he got close enough to see Matthew breathing and to see the tears on his face that he realized that it was an actual person. So, of course, in bad taste, a bunch of frat boys decided to make this float, and they eventually got expelled. So this was, in addition to some of the great, good positive coverage, there was also some backlash that happens, as is with when this kind of stuff happens. So there you have that. Okay, let's move along. Okay. October 11th, 1999. This is when Aaron McKinney's trial begins. He is eventually found guilty, and he was up for the death penalty until Judy and Dennis Shepard cut a deal with McKinney's lawyers to keep him from facing death. He ended up with 2 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. He also, in this is important to notice, he waived his rights to appeal. And, of course, Fred Phelps was there. And guess what? So was Angel Action. So were the Angels. So here you go. A year later, in October 12th, 1999, also, as the trial was set to begin, that is when the Journey to a Hate-Free Millennium premiered in Denver, Colorado. So here's just some more coverage of some of that stuff. See how much of this stuff I saved? Isn't that crazy when you think about it? All right. This one's back in October 10th, 1998. So this is before Matthew died, a couple days before Matthew died. You can see here, this is one of the first times you got to see Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson and one of the girlfriends after they were caught. You see some more coverage. The attack on student shocks Laramie. Here is some of the coverage about how Matthew was still alive, clinging to life. Meanwhile, they were actively investigating Aaron, Russell, and the girlfriends on the crime. They were very, very quick to find who had committed this crime, which you have to give a lot of props to the Laramie Police Department. Okay, so this is right after he was attacked on October 9th, 1988. Matthew becomes front page news on every major newspaper in the country. That is the truth. On October 6th, Matthew Shepard meets Aaron McKinney. We know that, and that was the night that they attacked him. October 7th, it was then, 18 hours later, that he was found by a young man who was riding his bike. October 8th, his condition was very, very severe and critical, and he was transported to Fort Collins on October 8th, and he stayed there until he died on October 12th. So there's some of that coverage. I should have put all this in order before I started. I apologize. I'm jumping all around. So this is the gay press and how some of them remembered Matthew. Just a few examples. Outfront Colorado, which is the big gay magazine newspaper there in Denver. Here you have Planet Q. Here's this lesbian magazine, Weird Sisters. This, I kept this one because this is how often people thought of how Matthew was tied to the fence together. So that's how that happened. Okay, let's see. What else do I have? Okay. So this was October 11th. This is the day before he died. You can see our president, Bill Clinton, spoke out against hate. This was right about the time when I believe the homecoming was happening in Laramie, Wyoming. I think that's where that picture comes from. Vigils had started happening. This is a picture of the homecoming parade in Laramie, Wyoming. You can see there's the banner with the green circles that I showed you about earlier. Most of these people, I don't know if you can see it, most of them you can see they have the armbands tied around their arms. That parade is depicted very well. Oh shit. Are you guys, am I still with you guys? Can you guys still see me or hear me? Oh no, okay. Some of you say yep, some of you say no. Hold on. Oh yes, okay, good, alright. Woo, okay, woo. Alright, whew, I wasn't sure. Okay, so I don't know where I cut off, but if I cut off, sorry if I did. Anyway, so this is the homecoming parade in Laramie. What was interesting about this is this parade started off like any old parade, and they depict it really well in the Laramie Project. But by the end of it, the parade, everyone had joined it. And it was this crazy thing, and the people who lived in Laramie at the time describe it as a very surreal experience because of just how crazy it was. Lost you at how Matthew was tied. Okay. Okay, so I simply said that he was tied to the fence at the bottom. He was with his hands tied together. And then we'll start at the beginning of this page again. So up here you have President Bill Clinton spoke out about hate. These are some of the pictures from that homecoming parade in Laramie, Wyoming, at the University of Wyoming that were taking place. This is all on October 11th, 1998. Some more of the vigils and things like that. So that's the coverage of that. Okay, let's go back here. All right, it's a lot of information, isn't it? Whew, a lot of stuff. All right, so let me see if I got some other stuff I want to share with you guys. So I mentioned that the coverage was worldwide, right? So this is an example. So here is a magazine. I don't even know what language that is, but there it is. And there's Matthew on the cover of it. I don't even know where I got this. Someone sent this from somewhere around the world to me because they wanted me to see that Matthew's story was being told there. Okay, hold on. Let me get you some more information. Okay. So this is a cover of the Vanity Fair. This is the Vanity Fair in which there's a huge story about Matthew in it. Let me see if I can find it while I'm talking to you guys. What was interesting about this is there were a couple things that came out in this particular Vanity Fair. One was Matthew's HIV status. Nobody knew about it. I knew about it prior to this, but most people did not. That Matthew was actually HIV positive. What's interesting about this is that several members of the police department, including Reggie, who found Matthew, had to be tested for HIV and had to take some HIV medications because they had come in contact with his blood. So that was one of the things that came out about this. Romy, please stop yelling. Well, go talk to her. Stop yelling at her. Sorry. I'm trying to find this story for you guys. Okay, so hold on. I'm almost there. So inside this is this picture of Matthew. I'm trying to get so it doesn't have a glare on it. This is actually a picture that I provided to the magazine. It's one of the few pictures I had of Matthew eating at McDonald's. We used to go to McDonald's all the time and get Happy Meals. That's a true story. Anyway, so this piece was really an interesting piece. What I remember most about the Vanity Fair piece, because it was a very big article when it came out, what I remember the most, though, was the journalist that came to my house. So she was this young girl, and oh my God, she was crazy. So first of all, she was the flightiest human being I ever met. Like, I'm like, I don't even know who you are. You couldn't even imagine that she was a journalist for, like a big magazine. Like, it didn't even make sense because she was so flighty and all over the place. And I'll give you an example. So when she came over to interview me, keep in mind, I'm like working 2 jobs. I'm poor as shit. One of my jobs is at a coffee shop. Like, I'm not like rolling in dough. And I had some leftover pizza from the night before. So she comes in, she sits down, and I start warming up my pizza, and she's like, oh, I'll take a slice of that. Okay. She was eating my fucking leftover pizza. I shit you not. So when this article came out, and it was so well written, I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know who wrote it, because it didn't even make any sense that this girl could fucking write this amazing article. If you met her, trust me, you'd understand. So, yeah, she was a strange one. I'll never understand, I'll never understand how that article came out of that girl. I really won't. So another thing I wanted to show you guys, hold on, getting it to the right page. One of the cool things that happened when I was working at GLAAD GLAAD was contacted by the New York Times Magazine. And Kathy Renna, who was my boss at the time, got the call, and they were asking about the people who did the angels at the trial of Matthew's killers. And they wanted to do a story on them for the New York Times Magazine. And Kathy, I remember her, because we kind of sat side by side in cubicles, she goes, oh, well, let me transfer you to the person who came up with that idea. And so I get on the phone with this person from the New York Times Magazine. He's like, listen, we really want to do a piece on the angels, if you don't mind, and we'd like to do it for our Christmas Eve version of the New York Times Magazine. So here's the cover of that magazine from the New York Times. And they said, we're going to bring you to New York. I was living in D.C. at the time. They were like, we're going to bring you to New York, and we're going to have you photographed by photographer David LaChapelle. Now, I don't know if any of you know who David LaChapelle is. If you don't, you motherfuckers should. Because he's taken some of the most famous photos you've ever seen in your life. First of all, he's gay. Second of all, he's fucking awesome. Third, he has directed some of the most amazing music videos ever. But he has taken photos you have seen. I guarantee it. And if you do not know who he is, go fucking look him up. Trust me on this one. He's a big deal. Now, I did not know this, because I'm still this young 20-something dummy who didn't know shit. So I fly to New York City, and they drive me to the Lower East Side in Manhattan, and the driver drops me off at this door, and it's covered in graffiti. It's like this gray door on this nondescript building covered in graffiti. And he goes, okay, that's where you're going. And I looked at him. By the way, I'd only been to New York like once or twice before this. And I looked at him and I'm like, oh, no, I'm not. I legit said, no, I'm not. I'm not going there. I don't know where that door goes. For all I know, you're delivering me to some kind of mass murder. So then they called up one of David's assistants, come down, and they get me, and I go upstairs to this, what is probably one of the most incredible lofts I've ever seen in New York City. This place was fucking amazing. It was covered with David LaChapelle photographs. It was fucking amazing. We have a little snack. I get to know David. He tells me about who he is, because I don't know anything about him. And then we jump in a van, and we drive off to who the fuck knows where to do this photo. I honestly don't know where we were at when we did this photo. I just know we were in the middle of a street somewhere in Brooklyn, in kind of like a weird little neighborhood. And as we were doing the photo, I'm dressed as an angel. I'll show you the photos in a second. I was dressed as an angel, and then one of the coolest things happened, and that was that a school bus filled with kids who were probably like, I don't know, between 5 and 8, unloaded all these kids from school, and they all kind of surrounded me and were looking at me dressed as this angel in the middle of the street. And there was like this cool cloud thing that was happening. All right, I'll shut up and I'll just show you the picture. All right, so here is that picture as it appeared in the New York Times Magazine. Now, I'm going to pick you up for a second because I want to show you something else. So, pretty fucking cool, right? Now, that photo also is on the cover of my book, The Whole World Was Watching. There's also a version of that photo on another book. I can't remember the title of it. Oh, God, that's so bad, right? It is. All right, so I don't know if you're going to be able to see these very well because it's a little dark in my house right now, but let me flip my camera. This is one of the coolest things I have in my house. I have 1, 2 original David LaChapelle prints that were given to me by David in my house. Now, you might notice this little crown hanging off the corner of one of them. What is that, you might ask? That is the crown that I wore the first time I did Angel Action. And I have kept it all these years later. So there you go. You can see my original David LaChapelle's hanging in my house. Pretty fucking cool, right? Yeah, I think so too. Ha! See?